and welcome back to Book and Page. We are still working with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and we are on to the second part of the first part. AKA, I made something of an arbitrary cut, just so that these videos didn't get stupidly long. So we're going to finish up part 1 today. And as always, we'll start with a quick summary of what happened during this section, and then get to some talking points. So, summary-wise, in the prior point, we have Arthur's court and a big green giant of a man coming in and disrupting everything. So this time, we start off with Arthur speaking up to the stranger to identify himself as Arthur, king of the court, and politely inviting him to join their New Year's feast. Which is normal. Well, the Green Knight is not here to join them, but he does reassure everybody that he's also not here to fight. He in fact has armor, he's just chosen not to wear it. Instead, he wants to play a game. Well, many of us have seen Saw movies, this can't go well. And the game he suggests is that he's brought along a lovely gigantic green axe, and any knight of the court can take a swing at him with this axe, as long as the Green Knight can return the blow in a year and a day. This offer sort of freaks everybody out, so that no one wants to take it up. Like, everybody's just like, nope, don't look at me. And this, of course, annoys the Green Knight, who starts taunting the court until Arthur himself gets upset enough to take him up on his offer. Now, thank goodness that Sir Gawain speaks up after this, because Arthur has literally at this point taken the axe from the Green Knight and is preparing to strike him. But Sir Gawain politely asks if he could please get up from his seat and take the position from Arthur, because he, as the least of all knights of his court, would be the least lost if anything goes wrong. And we all, of course, know something is about to go wrong. Arthur allows Gawain to take his place, and tells Gawain if he makes the right choice, well, it might be a while before the Green Knight hits him with an axe. So, Gawain does in fact behead the Green Knight, and a couple people kick that head around as it's going, except the Green Knight is magical, so he stands up, collects his head, says, "Hey, I'll see you in a year and a day," and heads on out of the court. Whoops! Who didn't see that coming? Apparently none of these knights. So, we actually end part 1 with Arthur and Gawain looking at each other like, well, that just happened, and Arthur reassuring both his wife and the court that everything's fine, don't let it upset you, let's just go back to the festivities, because Gawain has a year and a day left to live. So, a bit of an odd thing. I think we, of course, were certainly expecting it, simply because part 1 couldn't possibly end with the titular Green Knight getting his head chopped off and not coming back from it, but the court simply was not expecting this magical outcome, which is a little weird considering we've been told strange things happen all the time. So why they couldn't possibly think that maybe there's something wrong with this game beats me. Or maybe a lot of the court figured that out, and Gawain had to speak up purely when Arthur got angry enough, having his mother called a hamster, and his father being told he smells of elderberries, to decide he's going to fight the Green Knight himself. So, the interesting thing about this chapter is it is just chock full, beginning to end, with these oddly polite interactions, particularly between Arthur, the Green Knight, and Gawain. The fact that Arthur actually begins this conversation in a very polite manner is, like, amazing, because the Green Knight has done something incredibly rude. He's not only just busted into this party, but Arthur is in fact a king, and he is the king of this court. So coming in and being told, I don't know who's in charge here because he's obviously not that important, that's actually really offensive towards Arthur. Arthur is a king. He should be recognized, especially in his own court. So the moment the Green Knight comes in and starts looking around like he can't tell who's in charge, that says something more about Arthur's reputation, and it just comes across really, really rudely. But Arthur, in fact, is very polite about this. He not only identifies himself, but he politely corrects the Green Knight by saying he is, in fact, the king of the court. And he doesn't do it offensively, he doesn't get angry, he very much just sort of says, "Hi, I'm Arthur, I'm king here, how can I help you? Come on in, take a seat, join the feast, and then you can tell us what you're actually here for." And that is, in fact, the fully polite thing to do. Hospitality denotes that you actually have to invite the person in, make sure they're fed and watered before you even ask them why they're there. Which might freak a lot of us out, because that seems like a real good way to get stabbed. But hospitality, this is why head gods are usually head gods and gods of hospitality. They're sort of the ones in charge to make sure guests don't kill hosts and hosts don't kill guests. So Arthur not only is politely correcting this man, but he's resetting the fact that yes, we can put everything back on a polite conversation. Come join us, come sit, we'll have a feast. Now, the interesting thing is that the Green Knight sort of steps off of this and really denotes again that there is a difference here. There's a cultural difference of some sort, because the Green Knight actually refuses this invitation. And rather than joining the feast, or even thanking his host, he goes right to the fact that he's here for a reason, and he wants to play this game. Now Arthur tries to understand this properly by offering him combat. This is why he thinks that, this big green man with this big green axe might actually be here. And again, he's offering a way for this stranger to sort of put himself back on level with the court, because you've sort of interrupted something, dude, but hey, if you're looking for a fight, this is something normal. A lot of knights will joust with each other, fight with each other when they meet. We can set that up. We can handle that. And the Green Knight continues to sort of offset how this is going to go. The weird thing is, the Green Knight says that he knows everything that he should be expecting here. He knows Arthur. That's why it was super offensive when he came in and acted like he didn't. He says things like, "But because your name, sir, is so highly regarded and your city and your warriors reputed the best, that's why he's come." Okay, but you're not here for a fight. Then what are you here for? And the Green Knight can acknowledge that Arthur's court is known, but he won't not acknowledge anything more. He constantly actually puts himself off from the court, or even above it. When Arthur offers to set up a fight, if this is what the Green Knight is looking for, the Green Knight actually says that he would easily beat any of Arthur's knights. In fact, what he says is, "Those about me in this hall are but beardless children." Ugh, oh, excellent. Let's just insult everyone here. None of these people could attack me. They're basically kids in comparison to me. I could easily beat you if I wanted to fight. Now, he does say that he has armor, he's just chosen not to wear it, but the fact that he's not joining the feast properly, again, says something's going on here. And Arthur is starting to get a little less polite, because the Green Knight is simply not coming up to meet him here. So, when the Green Knight offers this game, and nobody takes him up on it, he immediately goes back to being offensive. He actually challenges the identity of both Arthur and his court by saying, "Is this not Arthur's court? Well, you have this reputation, you're supposed to be the best, and you're not acting like it. So you can't possibly be Arthur's court, and you can't possibly be King Arthur himself." So suddenly, not only has he offended just the knights, he's offended Arthur himself, and the identity of his entire court. From here, the politeness is actually set by Gawain. Once we get into this taunting mess, where Arthur actually steps out of his role as king and into a knightly role, it takes his own nephew sort of saying, can we get this back on a level everybody knows? And Gawain comes in almost aggressively polite to both Arthur and the Green Knight. And Gawain starts this right from the start, because he says something that actually lets off every other knight here. He sort of like raises his hand and he says, "Arthur, if you would give me permission to get up from the table." And he includes Guinevere in this as well. He asks Guinevere, "If it's alright with you, and Arthur, I will take you up on this." Because it would be rude for him to start by getting up from the table without the king and queen's permission. So Gawain sets back this politeness meter. Blood's pumping a little strong. Let's set it back down. I'll start my introduction extremely politely. And Arthur recognizes this, gives him permission to come up, and eventually does give him permission to take over for the challenge Arthur has accepted. Now, when Gawain takes over that challenge, he lets every other knight off for not having taken up the challenge by saying that he is the least of all knights. He's not coming up saying, "I'll do it because I'm the best." He literally says, "I am only here because I'm Arthur's nephew. So, if anything goes wrong, no loss if I'm the one killed. I'll take it up." This lets all the other knights off because, hey, they didn't accept this challenge because it's beneath them. And Gawain, in comparison, looks better because he is taking up this challenge with these reasons. The knights will like him, the Green Knight will like him, and in fact the Green Knight actually takes a step back and says, "I'm glad you're the one doing this." We've got things resettled, and we continue to resettle them because the Green Knight then moves into legal language, and Gawain follows this movement. The Green Knight wants to restate the bargain that they've struck about this game, and Gawain goes along with it, gives him his name, and they make sure they have an understanding here. Except, we run into a problem when it comes to this legal language. The Green Knight is almost trying to set up a binding contract between the two of them to make sure that they're both in agreement, and that way Gawain can't back out when it turns out the Green Knight can reattach his head, and Gawain probably can't. The issue is, though, that this legal contract is not binding, because the Green Knight fails several times in matching Gawain's politeness, despite the fact that he set up this idea that we need a legally binding contract. There are two failures that the Green Knight actually makes, and the first one is directly to do with this politeness. He asks Gawain's name so that they can make this contract between them, and Gawain provides his name. He then asks the Green Knight for his own name, and the Green Knight refuses. He says, "You'll know my name and where my court is after we've done this game." That's not how it's supposed to work. He has already openly challenged Gawain and knows who he is, so Gawain should also know who his own opponent is. And this is especially true because both names have to be known for any contract to be binding. So this legal language has suddenly actually gone out the window. The second issue is that the Green Knight actually makes this very odd choice where he says that he wants to reaffirm everything with Gawain. Words he actually uses here are to reaffirm without omission the agreement made. And this is where the Green Knight makes a big mistake if this is an attempt at a binding contract, because he in fact doesn't admit everything. And he does omit important language, aka that he can put his head back on. He's effectively immortal with this type of game. And why this is really important to both Gawain and Arthur is that they were both understanding that the stakes would be the same for both sides. Any blow that Gawain gave the Green Knight would be the same type that the knight would give Sir Gawain. And this includes the outcome. They are understanding, of course, that a fatal blow for Sir Gawain would also be a fatal blow for the Green Knight, and that's simply not true. They're actually entering this binding contract, not knowing who the opponent is, either his name or any magical abilities that allow him to not risk what Sir Gawain is risking in entering this contract and completing this game. So by the end of this point, it is purely Gawain's moral compass that will actually lead him on this adventure. There is no legally binding contract, despite the wording that the Green Knight attempted to use, simply because Sir Gawain did not understand the full contract he was entering. And he is not at fault. It was omissions that the Green Knight actually made, rather than Sir Gawain himself. We do get a name and something of a court position after this point, but it's too late. The bargain has already been struck. That name should have been there before, and as we'll learn, the name he gives is not even the correct one. So what we actually end up getting is politeness that very quickly turns not polite, that returns to politeness again with a legal twist that's not at all legal or binding. It's a very weird conversation that, in the middle of it, involves beheading somebody. Yet, oddly enough, when you actually look at the language used, the beheading is not the important part. It's all the language around it. We knew the beheading wasn't going to work. We're only at part 1 out of 4 parts. But the use of language and the way these people are trying to present themselves is extremely important. Now, before I go, I do want to mention something quickly, and this is sort of the interesting little thing right at the end of part 1, where we've just beheaded a dude and had him pick up his own head and leave, and we now know that Gawain is probably going to die. So what we actually have happen is this weird little thing where the Green Knight has now left, and we get this odd little line where everyone's sort of like, what is going on? Even the narrator, the author here, is asking, what then? There's nothing else he can really say. And then we're told, the king and Gawain grin. And we suddenly have what feels to us this very off response to what's actually going on. But it should be noted, of course, that a grin is not actually a nice type of smile. It's more considered a baring of teeth originally, which is a response to violent things. It is a response to a direct threat. You bare your teeth at other predators. So Arthur and Gawain grinning at each other is sort of this recognition between the two of them that something really wrong has just happened. But they have to then bring themselves back down, again, because they are in charge of the court. If the king and his nephew start freaking out, well, everyone's going to freak out. So they have this private moment where they actually bare their teeth at each other because they recognize that was, in fact, a threat. And then they come back down and say, well, let's continue the festivities, because that's the only way they can really respond to this right now. When we head into part 2, Gawain will actually be off on his adventure after a year because he needs to track down the Green Knight himself. Also, oddly, in addition to the bargain, that shouldn't really apply considering you haven't told him how to get there. But Gawain's going to do it because Gawain's a knight, and he's a good knight. He just makes some mistakes. So, I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.